We don't have any money, they say. We spent it all on transgender mice, they say. We have to revoke people's benefits, they say. And we applaud ourselves for saving $8 million on something, they'll say. All the while, Trump spends a bunch of money to go and do the golf. Now, I want to show that, and then I want to show you what Trump was doing while I guess he was out on the golf course and the absolute rant he unleashed. But what am I referencing? Just so you know, I don't have a problem in principle with presidents doing what they need to do to stay sane. I really don't. If that's on the beach, like Biden, if that's golfing, I think Obama and Trump both golfed, fine. But by their standard, there's a contradiction there, right? Because they applaud themselves and say, wow, we found $6 million on this thing, and they're cutting off money that then you think, oh, if we're looking for that minute of savings in the grand scheme of the federal budget, what about Trump spending in his first term over $100 million on his golf trips of the taxpayers' money? Again, if that's what a president needs to do, stay sane, okay. But not by their standard, not by their standard. And that's what I want to look at. Before showing you what Trump was up to during this, he did... Oh, I do want to reference this report. During his first term in office, the total for these trips was put at $150 million over 4 years, with the first 4 trips costing $3 million each. And this is for security and all the precautions that have to go into place, and the travel and the plane and all of those different things. So, of course, that's going to lead, when they're cutting off they're just pinching pennies on people's benefits, it's going to lead to people making graphics like this one. Meals on Wheels, 1 year cost to taxpayers, $3 million, canceled. Trump golfing in Florida for one trip, $3 million, approved. Flawed priorities, for sure. Mediaite reports they're sick degenerates. Trump flips out on fake news over story Putin kept his envoy waiting 9 hours. They made up that story. So while Trump was on his golf trip, he was sending off, I guess, in between holes or something, rageful messages because the envoy to Russia, Steve Witkoff, reportedly had to wait 9 hours for Putin to come meet with him, compared to their scheduled time. This is something Putin notoriously does because he thinks it's a power move. And Trump is very angry that anyone would say anything about Daddy Vladdy. The fake news, as usual, is at it again. Why can't they be honest just for once? Last night, I read that President Vladimir Putin in Russia kept my highly respected ambassador and special envoy, Steve Witkoff, waiting for over 9 hours, when in fact there was no wait whatsoever. Other meetings with our representatives of Russia did take place, and absolutely they took some time, but they were very productive. From there, things went quickly and efficiently, and all signs seem to be hopefully very good. In conclusion, there was no 9 hour wait or any wait at all. The only reason they made up that story is to try and demean, because they are sick degenerates. They have to start reporting the news correctly. This is why they have lost their ratings, their audience, and respect. Thank you for your attention to this matter, and God bless America. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. This is this is your account. Look, everyone, look with me. Donald J. Trump. We don't need the sign off like this is an email. The White House, Pennsylvania Avenue. We don't need the ending there. But referencing Witkoff got confronted about the fact that while Putin's pretending to be open to a ceasefire, he's also attaching to a potential ceasefire impossible demands. Like, essentially, this is the summarization of a longer explanation. Ukraine needs to make it nearly impossible for themselves to prevent a future invasion. And here is Steve Witkoff's response to Jake Tapper.
The first guest this morning is just back from his hours-long meeting with Putin himself behind closed doors in Moscow. Joining us now, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Envoy Witkoff, thanks for joining us. How was the meeting? Tell us about it. What did Putin tell you?
Well, first of all, Jake, thank you, and thank you for having me on the show this morning. I met with President Putin. I think the meeting was somewhere between 3 and 4 hours. It was positive. We discussed. It was a solution-based discussion, and that's how I would describe it.
So, as we understand it, and please correct us if we're wrong, Putin's demands include, one, the complete surrender of Ukrainian forces in Kursk, that's that Russian region that Ukraine seized. Two, international recognition that Ukrainian territory seized by Russia no longer belongs to Ukraine. Three, limits on Ukraine's ability to mobilize its military. And four, a halt to Western military aid to Ukraine and a ban on foreign peacekeepers such as French or British soldiers in Ukraine. Is that accurate? And if that is accurate, it does sound as though Putin wants to keep the land that he seized, and then he wants Ukraine to not be able to defend itself in the future. Is Trump worried that accepting these conditions might just set the stage for another Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Jake, I would not call your description entirely accurate. Look, back before this
Steve, you there?
visit, there was another visit, and before that visit, the two sides were miles apart in where they were. The two sides are today a lot closer. We had some really positive results coming out of Saudi Arabia.
All right, so then he goes on to tout how it's all going so well. Jake then asks the follow-up, well, what parts did I get wrong? And he says, well, everything's going great. And he doesn't specify is the point. Okay, so that is still the set of demands. Steve, just because you met, this is what they're getting wrong. Look, we're now in negotiations. Yeah, Putin was always willing if the United States would come in and go, hey, we'll get Ukraine to agree to something that would prevent any ability for them to defend themselves ever again. And there's no security guarantees. There's nothing. And so there's no achievement there. Now, if you could get him to concede on some of those points and allow for some security guarantees, now we have a conversation. But it seems he's trying to play Trump, obviously. Trump then posted, I am pleased to inform you that General Keith Kellogg has been appointed special envoy to Ukraine. General Kellogg, a highly respected military expert, will deal directly with President Zelensky and Ukrainian leadership. He knows them well, and they have a good working relationship together. Congratulations, General Kellogg. And interestingly, Trump's former Ukraine envoy had this to say.
Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that.
So, in the heat of the moment, often, truth is spoken in anger. He clearly feels that he has a bond with Putin and not with Zelensky. How troubling might that be if he is the, quote-unquote, lead negotiator, honest broker for any kind of peace?
Yeah, I think what that speaks to is Donald Trump views everything through the prism of himself. He was affected by this Russia hoax. He was affected by impeachment. And so he looks at that and he says, I had to go through that, Putin had to go through that. But at the bottom of that, when you're looking at things through that prism, is that he is fundamentally transactional. He wants to end the war so that he can get on with other things, not because he really cares about the end state. He just wants people to stop dying so you can get on with other things. And in this, I think that Putin is Putin. Putin will not come up with a reasonable approach to dealing with Ukraine. He doesn't want to live next door to an independent, free Ukraine. He doesn't want Ukraine to be able to protect itself. He doesn't want Europe to engage with Ukraine.
Exactly. And you heard this Trump thinks. It's so absurd when Trump did that rant. The Russia investigation, it came from Hunter Biden's bathroom. It was disgusting. It just absolutely no sense. And then he said, we went through a lot together, him and Putin. Because Putin did attempt to sway American sentiment in the direction of Trump during the campaign. That doesn't make Trump an illegitimate president. So we're not allowing for these absurd false equivalencies, but it's just something that foreign governments sometimes do, and we want to try to prevent it. But instead of going, that's bad, doesn't change the fact that democratically Trump was elected, but that's bad, MAGA goes, Putin went through a lot with us because he did that, and then people made an issue of it. It's ridiculous. Exiled Russian journalist Mikhail Zeiger said that Putin and Trump, they're like soulmates.
I think Vladimir Putin has been watching Donald Trump for so many years and seeing him some kind of a soulmate, I guess, because both of them share.
Is it really so bad that they're soulmates? They're a match made in heaven. Ultimately, all Vladimir wants is just to go out on a beach with a margarita and share a nice kiss on the cheek with Trump. It's like Romeo and Juliet. It's a love that the world says they can have, but let them have it. Melania won't care.
The same perception, same very cynical and non-ideological perception of the modern world. And I will tell you even more from what I'm hearing from Moscow right now. They feel that that's the end of the United States as they used to be. So,
As the leader of the world.
as the stronghold of liberal democracy.
Okay.
And they compare it to the collapse of Soviet Union, because Soviet Union was the state based on ideology. And since the moment people stopped believing in communism, Soviet Union was doomed to collapse. And finally it collapsed because its leader...
Isn't that just absolutely tragic? In Russia, they're cheering on the fact that Trump is facilitating the collapse of us as a leader of liberal democracy, as a standing for those principles. Really horrifying. By the way, my joke about the soulmate, I hear that. I hear the journalist's point there. Not mocking him, but the idea that is very much true, which they have a bizarre love affair going on, Putin and Trump. A New York Times reporter, I referenced the DOGE quote unquote savings, and they'll get really excited about money here or there, but they're also just absolutely lying. And a New York Times reporter exposed it interestingly here.
Over the last few weeks, we've been reporting on errors in the so-called wall of receipts. This is a website that Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency has set up in the name of transparency to show how it saved American taxpayers money. How did Musk and his team respond after we found those errors? By making their work less transparent and making their errors harder to find. But we found them anyway. DOGE has added a new section to its website. This one deals with federal grants. They posted 3,500 new federal grants that they said they'd canceled and saved $10 billion in the process. But they only included minimal information about each one of these grants, like the agency that made the grant and the amount of money they claimed they had saved. They didn't include other details that would allow a reporter like me or anybody else to track down which grant they were talking about and to figure out if the claim DOGE was making is actually true. But they left identifying information for each one of these grants embedded in the code of DOGE's website. This long string of numbers is a unique award ID that identifies each grant within the federal government's bureaucracy. And what we discovered was basically the same kind of error they had been making before. There were 5 of those errors, and just the top 20 largest savings they were claiming. Those errors started with the largest item on the list. DOGE said it had saved $1.75 billion by cutting a contract to a public health nonprofit. When we talked to that nonprofit, they said DOGE's data was wrong twice over. First, they said the contract had not been canceled. Second, they said that even if it had been canceled, all the money that the government owed them had already been paid. So the savings achieved by terminating this contract would be 0. In other cases, Musk's group seemed to have misunderstood a fundamental part of government contracting. They said they'd saved $83 million by cutting a grant from USAID to a nonprofit called Engender Health. What that group told us was that DOGE had been looking at something called a ceiling value, basically an upper limit on what the government could ever possibly spend. Instead, they'd been given a much smaller number, $1.2 million, of which they'd already received about $500,000. So the savings achieved by cutting that grant, they said, was not $83 million, but something much smaller.
So the ones, I saw someone mention it this way, the ones who are claiming to find fraud are the ones doing the fraud. And as that gets revealed, we're so, Elon Musk has said, we're so transparent. We put everything out on that DOGE site so you can see it. This is why you don't need to worry about looking into conflicts of interest or me shutting down agencies that were investigating me. Stop it. Shh. Instead, you can just, it's all there. It's all transparent. But they're making it less and less transparent as the transparency that was there, that wasn't enough, but there was some, is causing people to learn that they've been lying about the figures they're supposedly saving and where it's being saved. So I just want to toss that in as we go through some miscellaneous thing here. A MAGA influencer, going back to the Russia invasion of Ukraine story, DC Drano, asked his followers, who do you trust more to tell the truth about the Ukraine war, Biden, Putin, or Zelensky? And Putin got 96% of the vote. So if you wonder why MAGA is not upset with Trump for aligning with Putin, because many of them want him to do just that. Then Phil Williams, a journalist, said, when I was in college, I seriously considered going to work for the Voice of America because I admired its mission to show the world how journalists in a free society were allowed to tell truths that other governments denied. That voice has now been silenced. And what he's citing is the fact that Voice of America, the government-funded institution that seeks to promote messages of a free press across the world, especially in places that don't have access to that information, it's now being dismantled. NPR reports journalists showed up at the Voice of America today to broadcast the programs, only to be told they had been locked out. Federal officials had embarked on indefinite mass suspensions. And so what we're seeing now is that the institutions that have been set up to even bolster the positive part of an American principle, free press, being dismantled as well. Quote, from what I hear, this is shaping up to be a really sad day. USAGM networks share important news, information, American values around the world. It took decades to build this goodwill and an audience of hundreds of millions every week. Seeing arsonists just set fire to it is awful. The cancellation of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's grant agreement would be a massive gift to America's enemies. The Iranian Ayatollahs, Chinese communist leaders, and autocrats in Moscow and Minsk would celebrate the demise of RFE and RL after 75 years. Handing our adversaries a win would make them stronger and America weaker. So just add that to the pile of concerning stories. I mentioned that Putin is trying to play Trump. Here is Mike Waltz saying that's absurd.
A European intelligence service uncovered a document that was prepared for the Kremlin the same week the president's team met with the Russians in Saudi Arabia. According to the Washington Post, it details much of what we've already seen play out, basically telling Russia how to stall while it continues to dismantle the Ukrainian state. It, quote, lays out ways in which Russia could boost its negotiating position by exacerbating tensions between the U.S. and both China and the European Union, by proposing U.S. access to Russian minerals, including territories it occupies in Ukraine. It also goes into how Putin should reject peacekeepers, propose demilitarized zones along the border. How do you know President Trump isn't being played right now by Putin?
Well, look, that's almost laughable. I'll take President Trump in dealing with the.
All right, so let me jump over as she's detailing that report that exposes what's going on here, but here's his full response.
And Trump isn't being played right now by Putin.
Well, look, that's almost laughable. I'll take President Trump in dealing with the likes of Xi, of Kim Jong-un, with Putin and others. Certainly, ahead of his predecessor. And really, as both President Putin and Zelensky said on our first call just a few weeks ago, only President Trump could drive this to an end. Mm-hmm. Only President Trump could bring this war to...
Okay, so then it's just a bunch of platitudes. What do you say about this report that a Russian think tank urged the Kremlin to do all the things that he's now doing to ultimately further his ambitions to dismantle Ukraine as a free country? Well, Trump is really good at negotiating, and he wrote Art of the Deal. I mean, he didn't really write it. He had a ghostwriter write it. But, he published it under his name, and so he's really good, and he ran casinos. I mean, they ran bankrupt, but they were good, and he could have made more money by just investing the money that he inherited from his father instead of starting business with it. But he's a genius businessman. If you see his makeup, he does such good makeup. He has such good hair. His hair implants, they've gone so well, and he's such a smart guy, and he knows Putin so well. Have you heard the conversations that he's had with Putin? And Ukraine was the apple of Putin's eye, but he didn't go in, even though he was in. And also, Kim Jong-un, he shook Kim Jong-un. He knows him so well. He called him Rocket Man, but then he didn't call him Rocket Man because they wrote love letters back and forth. And if you've seen the way that he's friends with Viktor Orban, thank you for nothing, Mike. It's so sad. It is so sad. One thing that's kind of hopeful is this: in Serbia, the pro-Russian president is being protested, and in Hungary, the pro-Russian prime minister is being protested. Maybe we're going to see global backlash to the horrific things and ideological alignment from leaders across the world in an authoritarian direction. and that would be a good thing. Hopefully it happens soon enough. Share your thoughts in the comments.